Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Right now we are seeing an escalation in Eastern Europe. Russia has invaded the Ukraine today on multiple points, and it looks like the country could fall within days right now. This is of course a catastrophe for the Ukraine, for the people in the Ukraine, but it remains to be seen if that fire will spread and we will have a worldwide catastrophe, basically World War III. And that might depend on what is happening in the coming days and, for example, also how China will react. But before I say anything else, I want to say that this is a very sad day. This is another brother war. This should not be happening. This is European people against other European people. This is something that we don't want to see in our world, on our continent anymore. This was preventable, I think. The responsibility ultimately lies, of course, with Russia, as they are the acting power now, the acting faction. But of course, it doesn't come out of the blue. There was a story leading up to this. In today's talk, I want to go over the reason that Vladimir Putin has given for his action, and I also want to let you know what my perspective on the thing is, my German perspective, and maybe parts of that may surprise you. I also want to talk about the reaction of the West and also of Germany in particular. So maybe I start with that. So far, only sanctions have been discussed. Direct action has not really been on the table, at least for European powers as far as I have read. Germany still says we will not deliver any arms to the Ukraine. As I mentioned in the last video on the topic, we sent them 5,000 helmets, but that's not really what they wanted. They actually wanted stuff from us that we wish, that our army wishes they had. And the fact must be stated once again, Ukraine is not a NATO member, and that is why that is not a NATO defense case. And so even when it comes to these economic sanctions, it is very difficult. Because the US, of course, doesn't want the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and in fact, it has been put to a halt. Well, it can be reactivated at any time, but this project has been put on hold now from the German side, as our leadership was instructed by the Biden administration. So once again, the US wants us to put sanctions on Russia and to exclude them and to not import this and that from them. Meanwhile, I have to say that now the US themselves, they are importing oil at record numbers from Russia, of course. And if they wanted to exclude them and to put sanctions on them, why don't they then also lead by example and also stop their oil imports from Russia? Well, and it is very clear why they don't do that. They are already hit by inflation, and if the gas prices go up even further, that could escalate really quickly in the United States domestically. Now, just to put things into perspective, in Germany right now, gasoline is 250% more expensive, more pricey than in the United States. And that is already the case without any sanctions additionally on Russia. So just try to imagine what would happen in the US if their gas prices would rise to German levels or something like that. So what I'm trying to say with that is, even when it comes to just economic sanctions as a response, the so-called West is not unified whatsoever. And the other reaction from the West is, of course, strong condemnation and strong words towards Russia and Vladimir Putin. Our foreign minister Annalena Baerbock, for example, says that he has inhumane delusions, and she basically calls him a madman at that point. And she's not alone in this, of course. And this is the thing that I find so fascinating, that the West is talking so much about diplomacy and soft power and the negotiating table, yet they refuse to talk to Russia, one of the most important party when it comes to security of Europe, of the West, of the USA, and so on. And in order to make that clear, I want to give you one example. So just recently there was a MP in the German parliament, a opposition MP, and he asked a Green Party guy a technical question, rather technical question about what they think to do about these high gasoline prices in Germany. And then that Green Party guy just stood up and said, I'm not answering that question because I am a Democrat, and as a Democrat, I don't talk to people like you. Yeah, that was his answer. And this is basically what we're doing also with Russia. We're saying you're not like us, you're not accepting the alphabet soup, so that is why we don't have to talk to you. Yeah, believe it or not, but for a very long time, right up until this moment, there was a lot of radio silence. There was a lot of non-negotiation going on between Western powers and Russia. And one of the reasons for that is that the West, and especially these woke countries like Germany or also other Western countries, they think that they don't have to talk to Putin because he's an evil guy. And we are good people and we are so pure and have the moral high ground, and that's why we don't have to talk to him. And that is blowing up into our faces right now. And I say it once again, trying to understand their motivations and trying to take them seriously on some level doesn't mean that you agree with them or that you're siding with them. But when you are a foreign minister or when you're a diplomat, then it is your job to try to understand them and to try to reach some kind of an agreement with them. And that is just what we refused to do. We didn't accept them as partners. We called them, or I think Obama called them, a regional power. We reduced them to the level of an energy exporter with no other importance. Yeah, and maybe that did hurt their pride, but maybe they had other reasons as well. It is not one reason, I think. So what is Putin saying? It is very interesting to me that he is parroting a lot of the talking points of Western countries from the previous decades. For example, he called it a peacekeeping mission of some sorts. And that is what the West has always said when they invaded another country. That's what we said in former Yugoslavia. Germany had peacekeeping missions there, yes, in Macedonia or in Kosovo. That was a peacekeeping mission, sure. Afghanistan was a peacekeeping mission, yep. He also speaks of atrocities that were committed by the Ukrainian military in the East against ethnic Russians. And when you compare this to what the coalition of the willing or what NATO said in the case of former Yugoslavia, and then they set up Kosovo, for example, and forced Serbia to accept this, yeah, that might have just served as the blueprint of what Putin is trying to do in the Ukraine now, but I think he will go further. And in a way, Kosovo is a really bad example because Europe and the US is not made up of Albanians. So that is a very bad example, but I want to give you an example that is maybe more realistic or a better comparison. And that I can understand as a German very well, actually. It doesn't sound unreasonable to me at all. Because Germany acted like that in the past before. And of course, I'm referring to the German minority under Danish rule in the 19th century. Of course, I'm referring to that. What else would I be referring to, right? That is a very important piece of history, of German, but also European history. And it is always overlooked when we discuss the unification of Germany, the formation of the first German nation state in 1871. We always talk about the victory against the French and how we then proclaimed the German nation in Versailles. But a very important war leading up to this was the war of the Germans, not Germany, because it wasn't unified at that point, but of the Germans against Denmark. So I don't want to go into all the details, but suffice it to say that there was an ethnic German minority who were a majority in some of these regions that was occupied or that was under the rule of the Danish state. And what really escalated things was the idea of the Danish that it would be a good idea to force these Germans to speak Danish and to ban the German language there, among other forms of harassment and oppression. So long story short, Prussia and Austria sent their troops in, crushed the Danish, and resolved the issue. And that is what anybody should expect to happen when you see that your people in another country, in a neighboring country, are mistreated and you think you can put a stop to this. So what Putin is doing now is very much alike. It's not the same thing precisely. Nothing is the same thing as anything else, but it is very much alike, in my opinion at least, to what happened between the Germans and the Danish in the 19th century. If you want to make a comparison with the 20th century, you can do that too, of course. So now we had security concerns, then also concern for fellow Russian people in the eastern Ukraine. And now, as a third thing, I think that Putin, of course, wants to re-establish Russia, the Russian Federation, as a world power, not just as a regional power. He has an image in his head of how Russia should look like, what is part of Russia and what isn't. And I think at least eastern Ukraine, in his mind, probably belongs to Russia. So he has this idea of Belarus, of Ukraine and Russia as the Russian people united under orthodoxy and so on and so forth. That is, of course, a way of thinking that is completely foreign and alien to our leaders in the West, who only see money and call themselves world citizens, and who are, let's be frank here, a little bit disgusted by their own ancestors and who don't like their own history and they don't like their own people. There is a lot of self-hatred that is very obvious in the Western world, and Putin and many Russians who like him, who support him, who vote for him, they don't suffer from that affliction. And so maybe it is also not a stretch to say that he waited for him, in his mind, right moment, and he sees the weakness, the decadence, and the division in Western countries or among the West. And he thought that is the perfect moment to strike. There won't be another chance like that. So as I said last time, I'm not in the business of predicting the future or making any predictions, but I think it is really crucial that Western countries try to understand what is going on. They always talk of this multipolar world, but then they act as if the West or NATO or the US, that they are this world dominating power when they are not. They're always saying we embrace this new multipolar world order. Yeah, that's how it looks like. This is how this is. In a multipolar world order, you have to sit down and negotiate with people, even though they might seem unsavory to you. And you cannot rely on the certainty that the super duper world power USA is intimidating everybody and keeps them peaceful. And while I'm not the biggest fan of NATO, I always said, and I will continue to say so, that Europeans and especially Germans need to pay much more for their defense. We need a strong German army, and yes, we also need to cooperate with our neighbors. We need a strong European defense. Now that might be a European army, but that might also be just individual national armies training and defending Europe together. We cannot rely on America anymore. That is very clear. And when you just look at the secretaries of defense in Germany that Angela Merkel put there, and that continues now in the new government, you have Ursula von der Leyen, then you have Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, and now you have Miss Lambrecht. Yeah, just look at these old or middle-aged women who have never served in the army, who have no idea about the military, and they made them defense secretary by design. They wanted to humiliate Germany, they want to humiliate the armed forces, and they want to systematically destroy our martial traditions and our army from the inside, from the top. Or do you think it occurred by accident that for many years the Secretary of Defense was always a woman that has no clue about the military? And of course, each year and with each new secretary, it always becomes worse and worse and worse. And now we are at a state where the German military is incapable to do anything. They are utterly useless, nothing works, and they cannot get even the most simple job done anymore. And that is what they say themselves. The West has to wake up. They have come to terms with the world we're living in by now. And if we want to have a stable and secure future of any form, we need to strengthen our military now. And we have to put people into key positions who live in the real world, who have real experience, and whose gender or identity or the right PC attitude on this or that issue is not the deciding factor. But the question of whether or not they can get the job done, that should be the deciding factor. But of course, this is wishful thinking. All these things are done by design, and I don't think the West or Germany will wake up anytime soon, and it will only get worse because our weakness is enabling people like Putin. That is very obvious. And let's just see what China is planning to do next. I hope you all guys know how important Taiwan is and where all your nice computer chips come from, huh? Yes, at least many of them come from Taiwan. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about all that. Catch you guys again later. Servus, Kameraden.